Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Thanks for joining this episode of Clearer Than Truth. I'm Nathan Kiker, and our guest today is David McCloskey. David spent years as a CIA analyst, including serving as a presidential briefer. Since leaving the agency, he's become one of the most vital and authentic voices in modern espionage fiction. He's the author of the critically acclaimed Damascus Station and Moscow X, and his new book, The Persian, a novel that explores the high-stakes shadow war between the CIA, Mossad, and Tehran. Beyond the page, he's also the co-host of the hit podcast, The Rest is Classified, where he continues to bridge the gap between intelligence tradecraft and the public's understanding of global security. David, welcome to the show.
Nathan, glad to be here. Good to be with you.
Before we started recording, I was telling you that the onus of our show is to do deep dives and to make things understandable and not to be myopic, not to focus on just headlines. You're in a spot where The Rest is Classified is continuing to grow in popularity. Your books, which are scholarly but fun, continue to grow. Why do you think people are coming back to want to study these things, such as the Iran war or spy thrillers or the general intelligence? What is it about the current moment that is pushing people to care?
I think in general, when we talk about a topic of, like, let's take espionage, for example, right, in general, which is a common thread, obviously, in the podcast and the novels. I think people are really curious about things they don't have access to. We want to see what's going on inside the black box. We want to be in the inner ring. And so something that's really secret, a world that's really secret, is inherently interesting to us. And I think that espionage, the world of intelligence, is probably more interesting than other secret worlds because it can feel, and sometimes it genuinely is, but oftentimes it just feels like it is also deeply connected to, or in fact is moving a lot of the events in the world around us and that impact our daily lives. And so it might be a secret. What's going on in your neighbor's house might be a secret. And that is an interesting kind of world to explore in the realm of like psychological fiction, domestic thrillers. So that could be a secret, right? But we all know that's not moving world events, right? It could be very interesting relationally, but it's not high concept in that way. But for example, we just concluded a series on The Rest is Classified on this, agent the Brits ran inside the IRA called Steak Knife, and you could make an argument. I actually don't think it's true, but you could make an argument that that this guy, the intelligence he's providing, is sort of shaping the conflict between the IRA and the British state in the 70s and the 80s, right? I think people are fascinated in those kinds of stories because they're secret, they involve people, and they seem to shape the events that sort of we see in the news and the world around us. And that I think explains a lot of the interest in spy fiction and in spy stories today.
You, in your podcast, The Rest is Classified, unpack a lot of relationships that have shaped history, especially espionage. There's a great debate that a lot of people have that between, do relationships matter between people who lead states and organizations, or is it all geopolitical? Are states and countries and organizations always just going to do what they're going to do inevitably? Or what role do these actual relationships carry in driving events?
I think people matter a lot, and I'm biased because I'm a novelist. And so, at the heart of the stories are the characters and the people and what they want, what they care about, who they hate, their little quirks and foibles. Those things matter a lot in story. I think that because we're sort of, our minds are not computers, they're story processors, story creators, that people ultimately matter because influential people who have power, people who run governments, people who run big organizations, people who have thick, sort of relational and financial networks they have a view of the world that has a particular story to it, and that matters immensely for the sort of organizations they run and the countries that they run. I mean, take for example Saddam Hussein. So you could make a whole bunch of arguments about, the Iraq. Look at Iraq through this very geopolitical lens. What does Iraq want? What is the national interest of that country, that slice of territory, that system? A lot of what happened in the 80s, the 90s, and the run up to eventually the Iraq War in 2003 came down to what was going on in Saddam Hussein's brain. And so you have to have, I think, the analytical flexibility when you're looking at the world to be able to look at systems and big processes and kind of macro trends and all this kind of stuff. But you're gonna be less analytically sharp if you cannot also try to understand what's going on in the minds of individual people who matter. And I think that's true in literature. It's true in politics.
So I think you're right. I think some conflicts are vaguely inevitable. China, the U.S., Iran, the U.S., but relationships matter on the day-to-day and in the medium term. That's just my view. You both write books, host a major podcast, and now you have a TV development deal in place. You're doing it all at once. How do you think about each medium differently? What changes in your process in prepping for a podcast, in writing something like The Persian, to working on a TV show?
Well, the fundamental thread in all of those mediums is story, and so you have to be telling a great story, so that's helpful because if they were really, really different, I'd have to be on cocaine to get the things done that I feel like I need to get done.
It's not too late.
It's not too late. It's true. I've got I've just turned 40. It's a new decade, of productivity, of drug-fueled productivity. I think that you're right, though, that the form does impact the storytelling. The medium impacts the storytelling. So, an example of this, The Persian, which is my latest book, is told over multiple timelines. Some of it is in first person, some of it is in third person in the past. In novels, you can play around with perspective and with the timeline, the chronology, in a way that can improve the quality of the storytelling. It can increase the tension. It can let you reveal or not reveal certain things to the reader at certain times. Novel has a lot of flexibility in that way. A podcast. I have found, I'm newer to podcasting than I am to the novels. I have found that it rarely works in the podcast to move around a lot in the chronology. It's harder. So if you start a story in, let's say you're going to do, you're going to do Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction, whatever. If you start with him getting pulled out of the spider hole and then go back, like you have to do things that actually diminish the quality of the storytelling to literally say to the listener, we're going back now. So we've started in the spider hole. Now let's go back. And it makes it, for people who are consuming these podcasts, because you also have to think a little bit about the poor listener or the poor reader of your art. People are consuming podcasts, they're doing laundry, they're in their car, they're listening to an hour episode, maybe over the course of a couple days. They're going to get lost when you do that and be confused about where they are in the chronology. It just doesn't really work. So you do have to think about the medium. And I think it's the same thing, for, and frankly, in film and TV, it's like, it's a very narrow path to walk to actually get something made. A lot of stuff is in development. Not a lot gets made. The stuff that gets made, you know, you're going to have to take, let's say you're trying to adapt a novel. You're going to have to take some of the plot complexities, some of the characters, and probably streamline it in order to make the story as kind of, the conflict, the central conflict in the story, as clear, as sort of simple as you possibly can. Even if you're trying to, make something that's not exactly a commercial, Marvel film, like you have to simplify it. So
some would say you have to make it clearer than truth, David.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Nathan. Yes, it must be clearer than truth. So I don't know. These are kind of simple examples, but the form, there is an interaction between the kind of the storytelling and the medium. It does make a difference.
I hate that every conversation in 2026 has to involve AI, but do you worry that the use of AI will dumb down these mediums, will sort of dumb down art, and also sort of melt the brains of your listeners and readers? It's melted mine a little bit, and I think I'm not alone.
How has it melted your brain? I'm curious.
My attention span is less than it was 5 or 6 years ago. I graduated college 10 years ago, and I could sit down and research and write a 20-page paper when I was in college. I couldn't do that today at all. Like, even...
Why not?
I don't know. My brain jumps too much. You check LinkedIn, you check Instagram, you check your text messages. You're inundated with info. And that's not an AI thing, but now the content even more is shifted to yourself. Yeah. Just for me, trying to get work done on an afternoon when an Atlanta Braves game is on, and then I see their Instagram stuff, it escapes you, and then your brain just shifts and moves.
Well, they're having a hell of a season, too, to start
22 and 10. Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun.
It is.
Well, so I do worry about it. I worry about it for me and my brain, as you said. I worry about it for my kids. I think I worry less about, there's a bunch of different ways we could talk about this for 2 hours. I think it's and it is worth slowing this down a little bit because it's an important conversation. Like, I think that AI, I'm less worried right now about the idea that AI, someone's going to put together a whole bunch of AI written novels and people just want to read those. I tend to think that there won't be a significant demand. I'm not saying it's going to be 0% of the market. I think AI written novels could have some appeal, and there could be a demographic of reader who's like, yeah, I don't mind. I don't care. It's actually cool. I think it's cool that an AI wrote this. I want to read it. Or there could be hey, there's actually authors whose whole thing is to work with an AI to write the novel. And a reader's like, I don't, whatever. That's cool. I think that's unlikely to be a significant amount of the market for at least this foreseeable future, because I think for those people who actually want to sit down and read a novel, they don't. Most people, they want something that another human has created, that has the voice of another human in it, and they want that knowledge, right? They want to know that there was a person on the other side of this thing, and they're willing to pay a premium for that, right? What I worry more about, and that's a hypothesis I have, right? What I worry more about is actually that people just aren't going to want to read. And that there won't be, as you've said, there might not even be an ability on the part of a significant amount of the population to consume a novel. You won't be the attention span or the interest, or it's just kind of I could see a world where, let's say, 30-year-old person who has some kind of, knowledge work, white collar job, and who is paired with AI all day and is as you're saying, kind of, they're on their phone, they're constantly distracted. They have a job where they're kind of processing a whole bunch of 15 to 20 minute tasks throughout the day. They might be reading isn't valuable to me because I can, instead of having to consume something, I actually have, Claude or ChatGPT consume something for me and synthesize it, and then I kind of go through it and make it a little bit better, make it sound like me, add a few things, and then I push it out to the whoever needs to consume it on my team, my boss. That whole process is going to make people, I think, less able to read and to consume significant amounts of words. And so all of that could mean that there's just like less demand for novels, period.
I think so. I also think I can remember a lot of quotes from great books and novels, but I can't remember anything AI has said. So I still think humans have a way of ingraining themselves in other humans. As you work on moving some of your work to the TV screen, what are some of the non-negotiables when you're dealing with these Hollywood folks? What are the things you refuse to give up as you're getting ready to launch your show?
Honestly, it hasn't really come up yet. I think you don't really have. My belief is, as the writer of the original IP, like you have to be somewhat cognizant. You have to be cognizant that like you actually don't have a tremendous amount of influence over the project. There are so many, unless you want to like go to LA and be in the writer's room or in just a really hands-on kind of way, like change your life, right? You have to let it go. And for me, that the way you protect yourself creatively is by finding a partner in the production company where you're creatively aligned and where you seem to share a vision for the project and for the material and all that. Now, that's going to change over the course of the process, because it's like, well, where does the money come from to actually produce the thing? Who's the showrunner? Who are the major actors who are involved, and how are they going to shape things? Who's actually in the writer's room? All of these decisions, like, you kind of don't control. And so what I have done is, I've done this deal with Prologue Entertainment to develop a bunch of my IP, and I trust them and I trust their vision, and I love what they're doing. And so I've just kind of walked into it, and I have really great relationships with their team, and have found them to be like, okay, wow, we're really simpatico when we're talking about these books and stories. I'm kind of trusting them, right? That like, we're going to figure this out. I think it was a Hemingway quote. Someone had asked him at some point about his relationship with Hollywood, and he was like, I think the best kind of way to approach this is, you dump the novel off at the California border and let them hand you the check, and kind of like let it be separate. And I'm adopting a similar approach so far to the development of my stuff.
Fair enough. I want to shift a bit to The Persian, which is a fantastic novel that came out last year. And if I remember correctly, it was already written and in print before Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran in the summer of 2025. Now we're in an active war. When the real world starts smashing your fiction, what does that feel like as a former analyst? Is it alarming? Is it validating? Do you ever feel like, yeah, I fucking told you guys this was about to happen? Like, where is your head when these things happen? And did you think that we'd be where we are today when you were working on your novel?
Well, I'll take that one. That's an easy question. No, I had no idea. I think, look, I don't try to, and I actually don't think the book doesn't predict the war, anything like that. The book is taking place in the middle of a geopolitical conflict that has flared up. I mean, the book is like kind of a shadow war that has gone on for years underneath this conflict, and now we're seeing the conflict sort of come out into an open war. So I'm not predicting anything. I'm definitely in this, sort of in what feels like an increasingly chaotic geopolitical climate. I'm certainly not trying to predict anything, because I mean, the writing process takes at least a year, and then it's a year after that to have the thing actually come out. So like, it's like aiming at a moving target. Where's it going to, I start a book today that's based in Iran. Where are we in 2 years? I have no idea, So I don't try to predict anything. I will say that the current kind of geopolitical environment does does lend itself to a lot of different ideas for books. I mean, there's a lot of material out there. I think that thriller writers, military fiction writers, certainly spy novelists are, are frankly gifted by the fact that you can literally just open a newspaper and get plot ideas. It kind of is that simple. I think what I try to do in the books, what I try to do in the Persian, is find a setting for the novel that I think has energy to it. Israel, Iran, Shadow War, lots to do. You can do a lot with that, right? And as I'm building the characters out of that setting, I'm observing what's going on in the real world in order to give those characters authenticity and energy and life. And so what I hope happens, and what I think has happened with the Persian is I didn't write the Persian in some alternate universe of the Israel-Iran conflict. I wrote it in the real world of the Israel-Iran, sort of intelligence war of the last few years. And so as a result, when the book comes out and then you have a conflict like this, like we're seeing now, they feel like the book doesn't predict it, but they speak to each other because they're both based in reality. And so that's what I try to do. It's like, I'm probably going to start a new novel. Really in the next couple of weeks, that will be set back in Syria, like my first one. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go back and, I'm going to ground it in the reality of Syria over the past couple of years. And so wherever Syria is in 2 years when this novel comes out, hopefully there's a kind of connection and communication between those two worlds, because they're both grounded in the real one.
Well, if anyone has a good guess on where Syria will be in the next 2 years, it's probably you. That was your country of focus at the CIA. In the last 15 years, we've seen a civil war, genocide. We've seen Bashar al-Assad flee the country and become addicted to apparently video games on his iPhone in Russia and not actually do anything else. I want to
just like all of us. He's on his phone all the time, probably.
Yeah. I don't know if you read the
Instagram.
story recently. I think it was Michael Weiss in the New Yorker, the New York Times or something. But basically, his generals are like, "We're in trouble. We need help." He's playing Candy Crush.
Candy Crush, yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
What are you doing? But I think, let me pose the question this way. If you were sitting at the CIA in 2011, when this really started to happen, would you be surprised by this outcome today? And what comes next for Syria? And how much time did it take you to overthrow the government over 15 years? So,
yeah. Well, I left before I got to finish overthrowing the government, because I left the agency in 2014, so I did not accomplish that mission. I would be surprised by where Syria is today. I think in 2011, some of the big dynamics that have governed the conflict are not surprising, and were not surprising. As they weren't surprising in 2011. I mean, the fact that you had what became a very ethno-sectarian based uprising, the foreign intervention, these were things that we saw coming in 2011. But I don't want that makes it sound like, oh, we kind of saw the whole shape of this thing. No, I mean, the extent of the foreign intervention, I think was very surprising to me. I think the resilience, frankly, of the regime over that period of time was also surprising. Us analysts back in 2011, 2012 were talking about, sort of the different tools the regime had to stay in power. So it wasn't, to some degree, the fact that it stood up and fought wasn't totally surprising, but the degree to which it was, holding on to power for that long, was, I think, for me at least, I think over time it was like, it's surprising to me that they managed to win, but maybe it shouldn't have been. So there was some shapes, like the shape of the thing was maybe not a surprise, but certainly the outcome at the end. I mean, look, watching him fall, like the really solid open source Syria analysts in maybe starting in like 2020, late 2023, early 2024, we're starting to say, hey, look, this regime's really hollowed out. Like it hasn't actually, it sort of won-ish the war, but failed to win the peace. Like there was no peace dividend for anyone who had fought and died and sacrificed for the Assad family. The extent of the corruption had just become astounding and had hollowed out its coercive institutions and its militias. So and the opposition in the Northwest under Shara was had some bounce to it and was getting ready to make a push. And so people, smart people who were watching it saw that stuff coming. And I read their stuff and it's like, okay, what is it? What does that mean? And I think that the speed of the push out of the Northwest by the opposition, the extent, the speed of the collapse of the regime was a surprise to me. So when I was watching over the course of that weekend in December, I was astounded, like so many people, to see that there was at the end, he didn't fight. That was very surprising to me. I was shocked. I was kind of shocked by that. I thought there would be some standoff in Damascus, and he just left.
It always seemed to me from reporting that he really didn't want the job to start with. And he kind of probably just gave up. He's like, I've done this for 25 years. I'm done. A lot of people are arguing that the Iran war will be different, that sectarian divisions are not as deep. It's a Shia country, whereas there were bigger divides in both Syria and Iraq. Do you buy that argument? And do you think that Iran can avoid sort of a mass casualty civil war moving forward?
Well, I think, civil war is like the nightmare scenario going forward. The regime is still in control. We've had, I would say, leadership change, not regime change. And even though it seems, obviously good information coming out of Iran is hard to come by, but it seems to me that it's still holding on. So, and if that's the case, then yeah, we would avoid that civil war outcome. Iran, does Iran have some of the similar, it has similar ingredients, right, to Iraq and Syria, and that it is, it's ethnically diverse. It is, as you know, primarily Shia, but not entirely. It has some of those elements, but at the same time, the key piece is that you have to destroy or so weaken the security apparatus and the coercive institutions to enable that kind of local control and warlordism and whatnot that gets you to a civil war. And we're not there yet. And I think it's a scenario, but it's probably not the most likely one at this point.
You mentioned that you're going to start a new novel. Give us just a glimpse into it. Syria, tell us what we can expect.
Yeah. Well, that one is literally like notes on a cocktail napkin at this point. The one that I have coming out in the fall, is done, and that's called London Station, and that is a story about the U.S.-UK intelligence relationship and partnership, and how we could get to a world where that partnership has become weakened and we are in fact spying again on the Brits. That was the premise of the book. So that's the new one.
When does that come out?
That is out in late September.
And from just sort of my research, it features the U.S. administration that installs an unconventional CIA director who starts spying on them. How much of it is drawn from what you're watching happen in the intel community right now?
Well, I was very careful as I wrote to not make this the Trump administration.
Okay.
And
that was my next question.
And in fact, the story takes place. Trump is mentioned in the context of the book kind of offhandedly, but the story takes place in a sort of after a Trump administration. So it's not Trump. It's not anyone in the Trump sort of cabinet or national security community. But that said, I was definitely aided by the fact that, there's some good characters in the Trump intelligence community. And so little pieces, stories I've gotten from people who are still inside, little pen portraits of, some of these people, like, they're helpful in creating characters. Because the thing that I started the book with this idea that, okay, let me really test the intel relationship between the CIA and the British Secret Intelligence Service. And I tried a lot of different kind of ways to do that. And the only way that I could really do it, really put it under strain, was to have, and it could have been on either side of the Atlantic, but I felt like it was more plausible to be on the American side. You needed a new set of leaders who just have a unconventional view of the relationship with the Brits. And so you need someone who comes in, the novel, the incoming head of the CIA had been the founder and CEO of the largest residential home building company in the United States. So you've got a guy who's wildly successful businessman, commercial animal, no intelligence experience, and kind of doesn't like the Brits for reasons you'll see in the book. So you kind of need something like that to strain it. And so to feed those kind of characters, I mean, I took, stuff from government, but a lot of it, if any of my former McKinsey and Company management consultant colleagues are listening, a lot of McKinsey senior partners, I just took, who are their own special breed of crazy. And I think would probably admit it themselves. I had so many stories of interacting with these people that I just, I started to put those in, with some of these kind of higher up political characters, and it just, makes the whole thing chaotic. So inspiration from a lot of different places.
Yeah. Well, as someone who doesn't trust the Brits either, I'm excited to read it. A couple more questions before I let you go. Anyone who enjoys eating fish and chips you can't trust. But look,
it's deeply, well, you know what? Gordon
tell
Carrera,
your co-host.
I'll tell him.
Yeah.
I'll tell him. I don't know if he's a fish. He's more of a curry guy, but I'll let him know.
Fair enough. But look, you say you didn't draw on the Trump administration necessarily for this new book, but the Trump administration has reduced the power and scale of the CIA. It's reduced the Office of National Intelligence. As someone who's written the President's Daily Brief, what's your honest assessment of what these cuts mean for actual capabilities of the intel community?
So I haven't seen, there hasn't been, I think when Trump 2.0 took office, there was a concern that there would be some kind of massive purge. I don't think we've seen that systemically or even systematically. But what we have seen is some, I think, politicization of, really, of intelligence at times, but of select pieces of the ranks of the intelligence community where it's clear that political loyalty really matters. And these are at parts of, the bureaucracy where typically politics have no play. You can see that with people who've been dismissed on the National Intelligence Council. You can see that with people who've been pushed out who work on Russia. You can see that, with I think the absolutely horrendous treatment of some of these people who were in these kind of diversity, equity and inclusion roles, who, by the way, were in most cases doing these roles because they had been told to do them and kind of were being good soldiers. They're analysts or others who come off the line to do these jobs and who could have just been sent back to the line to go and do the things that they did, but were instead made an example out of, So you can kind of see that, we see glimmers of this in the administration. There's been, I think, politicization of the analysis on, Venezuela and its relationship with, was it Tren de Agua, that the gang. so that's a flavor. I think, that the maybe the bigger thing, at least as I spend time with my former analyst friends, is that like the administration is, I mean, they're still producing analysis, like it's not getting consumed really. And so I think there's a sense of like, this is kind of dark times. Like, what are we doing? If we're writing this stuff, and does it matter at all? Is it even being looked at? It's probably being consumed by some people at the Trump NSC. But, you've got a big analytic cadre who's been accustomed over the course of, most of the last 25 years, that their stuff is generally considered as part of the policymaking process, is, read by the president. Not happening. So I think it's been a hit on morale as a result of all of this stuff. And this is why it's just a complicated answer to the question, is like, I'll talk to other friends who are, mid-ish to upper levels, and they're like, my job is the same as it was before. It just kind of keeps on going. So you do have people who are just like, you know what, I don't care about the crazy politics. I'm doing this thing. I think it's interesting. And I just, soldier on.
I've seen that with some FBI buddies. My final question for you is, when you're delivering the president's daily briefing, how do you keep his attention? We keep talking about attention in this podcast, and it comes back. No one is busier than the president dealing with 100 crises at a time. How do you keep the president focused, and how do you actually remove any agenda you may have?
Yeah. Well, those articles for the PDB, there may be a page. They're short, right? And it's a page with a lot of white space. So it's not a long product. So you can get the bottom lines right up front. So literally, the way these things were, at least they were constructed when I was writing, was you could read the first line of every major paragraph and get the essence of the piece. So if you wanted to, you could read 3 lines, be like, got it. There's your what, your why, your so what implications, got it. The question on, how do you remove sort of biases and, make sure your judgments aren't value laden. I mean, there's a rigorous kind of analytical and critical thinking process that the agency trains you in, and how you do that. And, some very obvious things, like at the end of the piece, you're not going to say, well, you should do this thing. You think about how do you construct this analytically and stylistically so that it is pretty cold and concise and clear. So there's some techniques, pretty simple techniques to do that. The other piece is, these things are read and edited by dozens and dozens and dozens of people who can all chop on it and change language. And it goes through like 9 or 10 layers of review. Seriously. So you have a lot of people in the chain who can call you out and, edit that stuff out. And by the time you're done, you might have been the midwife for this thing, but you're not, like, it's a community or an agency product. It's not yours.
Very
truly.
Cool. I said the last thing, but the last thing truly is, Gordon Carrera as funny in real life as he appears on the show?
No.
He has a few canned lines. He knows
Gordon, yeah. Gordon. When Gordon's being funny on the show, it's actually an AI version of Gordon that we spool up. We spool up and have it deliver some lines. That's why, I mean, the electricity and data usage bills on the show are massive because of this Gordon AI, this avatar that we've constructed for him to make him humorous. No, Gordon Carrera is actually quite funny. Gordon and I,
how do you guys join forces on this? That's actually my final question.
Yeah. Well, so we got in touch. Oh man, what was it? Maybe like 4 years ago, because a mutual friend of ours, who's a former agency guy who worked Russia, was like, I was asking him questions about a novel. I was working on my second novel at the time, Moscow X, and so I had some Russia questions, and he was answering them. And he's like, "Oh, Gordon Carrera wrote this book about the illegals. Like, you should talk to Gordon. And so Gordon and I just started talking about that, and had kept up. Like if I was in London, we would grab breakfast or a drink or something like that. So just kind of like we were friendly and friends. and then when Goalhanger had like approached him, I want to say months before me, about doing an espionage podcast, and then it kind of like hadn't quite gone anywhere for a little bit, and then someone at Goalhanger had read Damascus Station and reached out to me, and they were like, "Oh, thinking about this kind of this espionage podcast. Like, who in your ideal world, who would be your co-host?" And they're like, "And it should be a Brit." I was like, "Gordon Carrera." And they're like, "Well, that's funny because we just talked to Gordon Carrera a few months ago about doing this before I'd ever read your books." And so we got paired up in that way, but we were already friends, and I hope at least that comes through in the podcast, because like we genuinely, like Gordon and I actually, I mean, for all the crap that I give Gordon, we really enjoy hanging out with each other and talking about these kind of things. So, we hope that comes through in the way we do the pod.
Absolutely. Well, David, you've generously given 40 minutes of your time. Where can our listeners continue to follow your work for moving forward?
Yeah, so you can get the books wherever you get your books. You can find out more about me at davidmccloskeybooks.com. And the podcast, The Rest is Classified, is out there wherever you get your pods: Apple, Spotify, Kazaa. If you're stealing your podcasts off of something like that, I'm sure you can get it there too. So I'm out there. And then I think most of my social handles are at McCloskey Books. You can find me there.
Thanks again for joining this episode of Clearer Than Truth. Be sure to tune in next time and share with your friends.